Sarah Whitmore's dream trip to Egypt began with celebration, but within weeks her silence sent shockwaves across continents. Khaled Hassan, the quiet cousin who watched from the shadows, and Nadia El-Sayed, the glamorous woman with a secret past, soon became the central figures in a chilling mystery that ended in the desert. What started as a wedding turned into a story of betrayal, deception, and death. Sarah Whitmore had always been described as adventurous, the kind of woman who preferred experiences over possessions. At 29, she had built a comfortable life in Manchester as a nurse, working long shifts and saving just enough to indulge her passion for travel. When a childhood friend announced a wedding in Cairo, Sarah saw it as the perfect excuse for another journey. She booked her flight alone, something that never frightened her, and told her family she would be safe. Her parents and younger sister tried to hide their concern, but they knew Sarah thrived on discovering new places, even if it meant stepping into the unknown. She packed lightly, bringing only the essentials, summer dresses, her camera, and a well-worn journal she always carried on her trips. Friends teased her about being too trusting, but Sarah believed kindness could be found anywhere if you looked closely enough. Boarding her flight, she felt the familiar mix of nerves and excitement, not knowing what the days ahead would bring. Egypt greeted her with intense sunlight, noisy streets, and endless energy. The moment she stepped out of the airport, she was swept into a world both chaotic and beautiful. She noticed the honking cars, the calls of street vendors, and the golden haze that seemed to cover everything. It was overwhelming, but in the way Sarah loved. She had no idea that her name would one day be printed in newspapers for reasons no traveler could ever imagine. For her, it was simply another adventure, another story waiting to be written in her journal. What Sarah couldn't have known was that this trip, unlike any before, would be her last. 90 days later, her story would be told by strangers instead of herself. The wedding Sarah attended in Cairo was a dazzling affair filled with music, laughter, and color. She marveled at the traditions, the flowing dresses, and the rhythm of drums echoing late into the night. As a guest from abroad, she stood out, but rather than feeling isolated, she was embraced warmly. Her childhood friend, the bride, introduced her to relatives and acquaintances, creating a web of new connections. It was during these introductions that Sarah first encountered two people who would later loom large in her story. Khaled Hassan, the groom's cousin, was polite yet distant. He lingered at the edge of conversations, rarely speaking unless prompted, but his quiet eyes seemed to take in everything. Sarah noticed his reserved nature but thought little of it, assuming he was simply shy. By contrast, Nadia El-Sayed radiated confidence and charm. Draped in a glittering gown, she carried herself with the kind of elegance that drew people in immediately. Nadia was quick to engage Sarah, asking her questions about her life in England, her work, and her reasons for traveling alone. The attention flattered Sarah, who felt comforted by Nadia's warmth and interest. Before long, the two women were laughing together, with Nadia offering to show Sarah the best places in Cairo beyond the tourist maps. Sarah welcomed the chance to see the city through the eyes of someone local. What she did not notice, however, were the glances exchanged between Nadia and Khaled across the crowded dance floor, brief but deliberate. As the celebration stretched on, Sarah felt certain she had made friends who would make her time in Egypt richer and less lonely. She could not have predicted that these encounters, seemingly harmless in the glow of celebration, would later bind her fate in ways she could never escape. After the wedding ended, Sarah decided she wanted more than just a glimpse of Cairo. She extended her stay, booking extra nights at her hotel and planning day trips to explore the ancient landmarks she had dreamed about since childhood. Her social media reflected her excitement. She shared photos of the pyramids standing against the desert sky, bustling markets filled with spices and textiles, and the calm waters of the Nile during a boat ride. Her family back home loved these updates, reassured that she was safe and enjoying herself. For Sarah, everything seemed perfect, and she felt a sense of freedom that only traveling alone could bring. Then, the updates suddenly stopped. At first, her parents assumed she was simply busy or disconnected from the internet. Days passed, and silence continued. Friends messaged her online, but none were answered. Calls went directly to voicemail. The cheerful flood of photos and short messages came to an abrupt end, leaving a void that felt strange and unsettling. Weeks passed, and her family's unease grew heavier with every unanswered attempt. Sarah had always been consistent in keeping in touch, especially while traveling abroad. To vanish without warning was out of character. Her sister began scrolling through her posts again and again, wondering if there had been hidden clues in her words or images. Authorities were slow to respond, dismissing the concerns at first by suggesting that tourists often went silent when traveling longer routes through the country. But Sarah's family knew instinctively that something was wrong. The vibrant young woman who had once shared every detail of her adventures seemed to have disappeared into the very city she had longed to explore. What began as a trip of joy was now shrouded in a silence too heavy to ignore. By the 45th day without contact, Sarah's parents could no longer endure the uncertainty. They filed an official missing person report, urging both British and Egyptian authorities to investigate. The search began with retracing her last known movements. Hotel staff confirmed that Sarah had checked out earlier than planned. She told them she was traveling south to Luxor to see the Valley of the Kings. Yet no bus company, train station, or private car service had any record of her purchase or departure. It was as if she vanished between the hotel lobby and the road beyond. Investigators combed through her belongings, only to find most of them missing. Her luggage had been taken, her toiletries and clothes gone. The only item left behind was a scarf, carelessly tucked in a corner of the wardrobe. At first, it seemed unremarkable, but to her family, it was proof that Sarah never left voluntarily. She never abandoned her things. The scarf became a haunting symbol, the first crack in the story of a carefree tourist. Police interviewed people who had seen her in the final days. Some remembered her spending time with a glamorous woman, later identified as Nadia. Others recalled seeing her in the company of a man matching Khaled's description. Both insisted Sarah had been alive and well when last seen, and both claimed ignorance about her disappearance. Yet their names now hovered over the investigation like shadows. The hotel's security cameras offered little help, capturing only fragments of her movements. A glimpse of her stepping out into the bustling street. A flash of her bright dress near the entrance. Then nothing. The trail ended abruptly. The more investigators searched, the more it seemed that Sarah's life had been deliberately erased, piece by piece. The scarf left behind in Sarah's hotel room soon became the most important piece of evidence. At first, investigators assumed it had been forgotten in the rush of travel. But when forensic testing revealed faint, dried traces of blood embedded in its fabric, the entire case shifted. It was no longer simply a matter of a missing tourist. It was now a criminal investigation. The blood was confirmed to be human, and while the amount was small, it raised dark questions about whether Sarah had been injured before she disappeared. The discovery of the scarf intensified the search. Police began questioning those closest to her in Egypt. Nadia was brought in first. She admitted to traveling with Sarah after the wedding, taking her to local markets and showing her parts of Cairo less known to tourists. Yet her account was inconsistent. In one statement, she claimed Sarah left her to travel south. In another, she said Sarah was planning to meet new friends. The contradictions unsettled investigators, who began to suspect Nadia was concealing something. Attention then turned to Khaled. Witnesses recalled seeing him lend Sarah his car during her extended stay. He admitted this, but claimed she never returned it. Strangely, he seemed unconcerned about the missing vehicle, offering no explanation for why he had not reported it. This added another layer of suspicion, as cars rarely vanish unnoticed in a crowded city. For Sarah's family, the revelation about the scarf confirmed their worst fears. Their daughter had not gone silent by choice. Something violent had happened. Yet without a body, proof remained elusive. The scarf was a clue that whispered of hidden truths, but it was not enough to bring answers. Instead, it deepened the mystery, leaving everyone haunted by what it suggested. On the 78th day of the search, a chilling discovery was made. Fishermen along the Nile noticed a suitcase drifting near the riverbank. Expecting it to be abandoned luggage, they pulled it to shore, only to find its contents disturbing. Inside were women's clothes, neatly folded yet waterlogged, along with a British passport bearing Sarah Whitmore's name. Tucked between the garments were personal photographs of Sarah smiling in front of Cairo's landmarks, now warped and stained by the river water. The suitcase was the strongest indication yet that she had met with foul play. Investigators examined the suitcase closely and found something even more telling: a luggage tag attached to the handle. The handwriting on it was not Sarah's. It matched that of Khaled Hassan, the groom's cousin, who had previously admitted lending Sarah his car. When confronted, Khaled claimed he had once helped her label her bag as a gesture of kindness. He denied knowing how it ended up in the river, insisting he had nothing to do with its disappearance. His explanations sounded rehearsed, raising further suspicions. The riverbank was searched extensively, but no additional remains or belongings were found. The suitcase seemed to have been deliberately placed there, perhaps to mislead or perhaps as an attempt to get rid of evidence. For investigators, it was both a breakthrough and a frustration. It confirmed Sarah's possessions had been handled by others, but revealed little about her actual fate. News of the discovery reached her family in England, breaking them completely. They had clung to the fragile hope that Sarah might still be alive somewhere, but the suitcase shattered that illusion. What was once a missing person case had undeniably shifted into the realm of tragedy. Still, without her body, closure remained painfully out of reach. As investigators continued to dig, their focus shifted heavily toward Nadia El-Sayed, the glamorous woman who had befriended Sarah so quickly. At first, Nadia seemed like nothing more than a sociable local eager to show a visitor around. But when police pulled her records, a disturbing history began to emerge. Nadia had been connected to a series of fraud cases spanning several years. Her method was always the same: targeting foreign women who appeared wealthy or naive, earning their trust, and then convincing them to invest in fictitious opportunities or hand over money for false promises of partnerships. Dozens of women had come forward in the past, reporting stolen funds and broken trust. Yet Nadia had never faced serious charges. She was skilled at evading accountability, leaving behind angry victims, but no solid evidence that tied her directly to crimes. Sarah's disappearance, however, was different. For the first time, Nadia's name was attached not to missing money, but to a missing person. Investigators pieced together the days following the wedding, noting how Nadia had placed herself firmly in Sarah's orbit. Witnesses remembered seeing them shopping together, sitting in cafes, and entering taxis. Phone records later revealed Nadia's number had called Sarah's repeatedly in the week before she vanished. The working theory began to take shape. Sarah had uncovered Nadia's schemes and perhaps confronted her. It was possible Sarah refused to be manipulated or threatened to report what she had learned. For someone like Nadia, accustomed to control, that defiance could have become dangerous. Though suspicion grew, Nadia denied everything. She claimed her time with Sarah had been innocent, that she had simply enjoyed playing host to a foreign guest. Yet the inconsistencies in her story and her troubling past made her the central figure in what was fast becoming a case of calculated betrayal. On the 90th day, the grim discovery that Sarah's family had both dreaded and expected finally came. A group of hikers exploring the desert outskirts of Cairo stumbled upon what looked like a disturbed patch of earth. Curious, they moved closer and noticed scraps of fabric protruding from the sand. Authorities were alerted, and a forensic team quickly arrived on the scene. Carefully, they unearthed a shallow grave. Inside lay human remains, partially decomposed from the relentless desert heat. Among the sand and bones were fragments of clothing, a dress Sarah had been photographed wearing during her trip, and a bracelet her sister immediately recognized from earlier pictures she had sent home. The identification was confirmed through dental records, erasing any lingering doubts. Sarah Whitmore, once full of life and adventure, had been silenced far from home. The desert that had once fascinated her as a traveler had become the place where her story ended. The news devastated her family, who had prayed for a miracle even as each clue pointed toward tragedy. For investigators, the discovery was both a breakthrough and a heavy burden. The body revealed that Sarah had likely died around the 50th day of her disappearance, meaning she had been gone long before her family's hopes began to fade. The condition of the remains offered little clarity about the exact cause of death, but the shallow grave suggested a hurried burial, the work of someone desperate to conceal evidence. The desert site itself raised questions. It was remote, accessible only by car, and unlikely that Sarah had traveled there on her own. The detail tied neatly into Khaled's admission about lending her his vehicle, as well as Nadia's suspicious phone activity near the same area. The grave had been found, But the truth of how Sarah's final moments unfolded remained hidden in silence. The investigation into Sarah's death intensified after her body was discovered. Forensic experts determined she had likely died within 50 days of her arrival in Egypt, placing the timeline squarely during the period when Nadia and Khaled had been most involved in her life. Soil samples taken from the trunk of Khaled's car were found to match the desert sand near the burial site, a connection he could not easily explain. Khaled insisted that many cars picked up sand in Egypt's arid climate, but the precision of the match weakened his defense. His vehicle, it seemed, had been used to transport Sarah's body. Phone records painted an equally troubling picture. Data from Nadia's mobile placed her near the desert outskirts on the same evening investigators believed Sarah had been killed. When confronted with this evidence, she deflected, claiming she had been visiting relatives nearby. Yet no relatives came forward to support her story. Combined with her history of cons and her unusually close involvement in Sarah's final days, suspicion against her grew heavy. Rumors spread quickly in both Cairo and abroad. Some believed Sarah had discovered Nadia's scams and threatened to expose them, provoking violence. Others speculated Khaled had played a larger role, perhaps lured into helping conceal the crime out of loyalty or fear. Theories multiplied, but proof remained elusive. The web of deception surrounding Sarah's case became clearer with each revelation, yet the central truth, who delivered the fatal blow, remained locked away. For Sarah's grieving family, it was unbearable to imagine that both suspects might escape accountability. Investigators pressed forward, determined not to let the case collapse under the weight of circumstantial evidence. The closer they came to the truth, the more dangerous and tangled the story of betrayal appeared to be. Khaled Hassan was eventually arrested, his calm demeanor vanishing as he was led into custody. Prosecutors built their case around the sand in his car, the suitcase linked to his handwriting, and the timeline that placed him in direct contact with Sarah before she vanished. Yet despite these pieces, the case remained fragile. Without direct witnesses or a clear confession, much of the evidence was circumstantial, leaving gaps the defense exploited. His lawyers argued that Sarah had borrowed his car freely and that others could have tampered with the vehicle later. They painted him as an unfortunate man caught in a web of assumptions. Meanwhile, Nadia El-Sayed slipped away like smoke. She vanished before authorities could secure her arrest, leaving investigators chasing fragments of her past. Reports surfaced of her being spotted in neighboring countries, but none were confirmed. For many, her disappearance was confirmation of guilt, though legally she remained beyond reach. She became a ghostly figure in Sarah's story, her name whispered but never formally charged. Sarah's family, heartbroken yet determined, pushed for international attention. British newspapers carried her face on front pages, demanding accountability. Campaigns called for stronger protections for travelers abroad, while social media spread her story across continents. Still, her parents were forced to sit through hearings that offered little closure, watching as the truth seemed to slip further from reach. The Egyptian courts launched a lengthy trial, dragging on for months, but resolution remained elusive. Khaled's fate hung in the balance while Nadia remained at large. In the end, Sarah's death left more questions than answers. She had traveled for celebration but was betrayed instead. Justice, as her family discovered, can be as fragile as truth itself, leaving behind silence where certainty should be.